The North Carolina Medical Society, the state's oldest member association, elected its first president, Dr. Edmund Strudwick, in 1849, during a period in American history when slavery was the law of the land. It was 12 years before the first battle of the Civil War was waged at Fort Sumter in 1861. And it was 14 years before President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, as the nation approached its third year of bloody battle in the Civil War. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. It was 16 years before the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which was ratified by the states on December 6, 1865, abolishing slavery, explicitly declaring, quote, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, end quote. And it was 19 years before the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified on July 9, 1868, granting citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including former enslaved persons, and provided all citizens with equal protection under the laws, extending the provisions of the Bill of Rights to the states. Since its original founding, the story of the North Carolina Medical Society's path to diversity, equity, and inclusion cannot be told without acknowledging the inescapable intertwining of race and the treatment of Black physicians in North Carolina.
Hi, I'm Chip Baggett, Executive Vice President and CEO of the North Carolina Medical Society. And I love reflecting on our history because without thinking through our history, it's hard to tell where we're going in the future. And this wall is the physical manifestation in our office of that reflection. It takes us all the way back to 1849 when we first organized. It's the first professional association in North Carolina, the first physician professional association. And it shows the pause that we took during the Civil War where we didn't have meetings, we didn't have a president because we were embroiled in a civil battle with each other. But then it also counts the years of Jim Crow laws that led to the formation of the Old North State Medical Society in 1887, nearly 40 years after we started, because we couldn't come together and figure out how to scientifically train all physicians in the state. If you fast forward then multiple decades ahead, you come to 1950 when our House of Delegates first talked about having a resolution to really bring all physicians together, at least for scientific training, to make sure that everyone was taking care of patients in the best way possible. That really didn't get resolved until 1955, and even then it was imperfect. We created the scientific membership, where physicians of color could join in the scientific meetings, but were still excluded from the social settings of all physicians. That wasn't really fixed until 1965 when the House of Delegates finally abolished all references to color and scientific membership from our Constitution bylaws. And when we first really came together as all the physicians of the state of North Carolina. Now from there, that history is accelerated with the first female physician as president in 1982, our first physician of color in 2014, and our second in 2017. This really shows how we have exploded in the transition in the last few decades, one that was a long time coming, but one that has transformation value for us long down the road.
Since its inception in the mid-19th century through the mid-20th century, Black people were denied membership into the North Carolina Medical Society. Documents in the archives at the North Carolina Medical Society describe the ethos, mores, and beliefs of society members at the time. For example, questioning the qualifications and competency of Black physicians. However, like with most other institutions and professional organizations within the United States during this period, Black people persevered and created their own professional organizations and institutions including Black-owned and operated banks, schools, and thriving business districts like Black Wall Street and the Hayti section of Durham, North Carolina. For Black physicians, it was Leonard Medical School on the campus of Shaw University and the founding of the Old North State Medical Society. In April of 1951, the Old North State Medical Society, made up of African American physicians in North Carolina, requested that they either be admitted as a constituent to the American Medical Association separate from the North Carolina Medical Society, or that the North Carolina Medical Society lift its racial barriers and admit Black physicians to the society. The AMA refused the request to include the Old North State as a constituent separate from the current medical society. The issue was raised again in 1954 when the Guilford County Medical Society passed a resolution that urged the North Carolina Medical Society to delete the word white from its bylaws. The House of Delegates refused. The House did, however, vote to allow each county society to admit Black physicians as scientific members. Scientific members were allowed to attend all scientific and business sessions and had the right to vote and hold office, but they were not allowed to attend social functions. In January of 1955, at the annual meeting in Kinston, a resolution was brought forward that recommended that the North Carolina Medical Society admit Black physicians as scientific members with the same rights and stipulations as the county societies had placed on them. In May of that year, after much spirited discussion, the amendment passed by a vote of 104 to 37. And in 1957, the first two Black physicians, Dr. Joseph Gordon and Dr. Joseph Walker Jr., were admitted to the society as scientific members. Although the relationship between the North Carolina Medical Society and the Old North State Medical Society has been fraught with challenges and contentions, there have been efforts to heal the harms of the past and move toward a future of mutual respect and partnership. Dear Dr. Bruton, please accept my apologies for the delay in this correspondence. Permit me to say that I considered our meeting in Raleigh as well worth our time. Your commitment to support our choice of a person to serve on the Board of Medical Examiners was most appreciated. In the long run, I think that consideration should be given to amending the legislation so that Old North State Medical Society is also included within the North Carolina Medical Society in the responsibility of recommending possible appointees to the governor for service on this important board. I would hope you can support this proposed change in the legislation. I look forward to further meetings and discussing of matters of mutual interest and concern. Sincerely yours, Dr. Percy E. Jones, sent to the North Carolina Medical Society on October 15, 1996. Dear Dr. Jones, in our discussions with your leaders several months ago, it was clearly admitted to the mistakes and poor way in previous years that Black physicians of this state were treated by the North Carolina Medical Society. We can rejoice together that this is no longer the case. It was wrong then, wrong now, and will be wrong forever. You mentioned on several occasions that some of the problems of Black physicians are different than those of white. I feel that may be the case in some instances, but that we probably have more common problems or, quote, opportunities than we sometimes realize. I cannot emphasize the importance of your leadership opening the doorway for the North Carolina Medical Society to become a permanent part of your physicians' careers and livelihoods. I hope that you will continue to support the North Carolina Medical Society and to work with us on membership activities so that we can build a stronger organization to represent all the physicians of North Carolina. I look forward to hearing from you in the very near future. Sincerely, H. David Bruton, President, in 1996.
Racial Reconciliation Task Force. And what was this task force all about? The task force would identify those physicians and families who were affected by discrimination. And those doctors were not able to have full membership with North Carolina Medical Society. They could only be scientific members, and they could not attend the social events of the organization. But the North Carolina Medical Society board to go back and acknowledge to those families that we understand the hurt, that we understood the discomfort, that we understood the impact of those policies of early years. The Racial Reconciliation Task Force also allowed us to apologize and to reach out and give that now virtual hug and say, we can move past this. Dr. Claudia Richardson is the daughter of Dr. Joseph Weaver, and he was the physician, the family doctor, who was so brave to say that the scientific membership will not suit my purpose, nor does it suit me as a physician, nor does it suit me as a man who should not have to deal with that level of humiliation. Dr. Claudia Richardson will share what her dad went through. And she will share her memories of her mom, her dad, their clinic, all their activities in Ahoskie, and what they had to do because of segregation.
My father went to medical school at left Winton, North Carolina, right down the road, and went to undergraduate school and medical school at Howard University, and also did additional training there as well. Served in World War II for a second, for a short period of time, and then wanted to open his practice back here in Ahoskie, North Carolina, and had difficulty even getting access, or had trouble starting a practice here. So he first went to Hertford, North Carolina, and opened his first practice in Hertford, North Carolina. And as he moved back toward Ahoskie, he always kept that Wednesday night clinic in Hertford for many, many, many years, over 50 years, I'm sure. When he did eventually come back to Ahoskie, he started a practice on Railroad Street, which is no longer there, obviously. And he also worked with the health department quite a bit. At the hospital at the time also did not allow, was segregated. That's the best way to say that, was segregated. And women of color were not allowed to deliver babies at the hospital. So he and my mom built what later became Weaver's Clinic on 111 North Maple Street. And upstairs, he had an L&D unit, essentially. My mother happened to be a nurse, so they worked together. And to build that building, they share this story of working their other jobs, my mom in a segregated hospital setting here, and him at his clinic, but at night they would put down tile and all of that. Some of that work they did with their hands to create Weaver's Clinic, which was just a major practice here in town, a very, very busy practice in town. And he was a member, an active member of the North Carolina of the Old North State Medical Society, but he wanted to become a member of the North Carolina Medical Society, and also wanted to become a member of the AMA, the AMA, and he was denied those privileges because of his color. I shared this opportunity to meet with the North Carolina Medical Society, and how honored I felt on behalf of my father. he wasn't much for huge accolades, which is really interesting. But to know that that we're even having these conversations now as a woman and a woman of color in medicine in Eastern North Carolina, all of those things, we are appreciative of the gesture, and hope that having these open conversations will help move us along so that we can have synergy in our work.
The North Carolina Medical Society is well positioned because of the Race Equity Institute. We now have a health equity lens. That health equity lens allows us to actually utilize the information for the Maternal and Child Equity Task Force, to utilize that information in terms of our guiding principles, to utilize that same information in the creation of future task force and committees. The idea that every physician can now be part of the North Carolina Medical Society, regardless of race, background, culture. Every physician has an opportunity to be the best they can be for the sake of the people of North Carolina.
Glad to be here today to talk a little bit about our experiences together. My name is Dr. Paul Cunningham. I'm a surgeon by training, and I'm originally born in Jamaica in the West Indies. Came to the United States to complete my training after getting my medical degree at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. Completed my training at Mount Sinai, New York City. Spent 3 years in Harlem at Joint Disease North General Hospital, and then made a transition to North Carolina. That was fortuitous because I moved to Windsor, Bertie County, North Carolina, which is 60% African American at the time. My association with the North Carolina Medical Society started soon after I came to North Carolina in 1981, and wasn't sure what my role would be in leadership, but I recognized it would be important to join the House of Medicine, as it were. Discovered sometime after that there were two houses of medicine in North Carolina. There was the oldest professional organization in the state, which happens to be the North Carolina Medical Society, established in 1849. And then there was the Old North State Medical Society, established in 1887, if I'm correct. These two organizations were operating in parallel in this state. Something still mind-boggling to me at the time, that that the House of Medicine was divided. So our foundations depend on service to others, and I couldn't imagine why we couldn't serve together. But, so happens that I was the first African American black physician to become the president of the North Carolina Medical Society. There's a little bit of a tidbit that I'd like to share with you, though, that I was not the only Jamaican physician or I should say a physician of Jamaican heritage that had been influential at some point during the history of the North Carolina Medical Society. Dr. Joseph Gordon in 1950 was the one who brought up the issue of membership of black physicians in the medical society. It took until 1961 or 62, somewhere in that range, before the society voted to admit black physicians to the North Carolina Medical Society. And it was during my presidency, actually, that Bob Seligson, then the executive director of the Medical Society, provided a formal apology to Old North State because of the exclusionary practices that had taken place for so many years. Maybe it was naive on my part, but my sense was that the House of Medicine was one thing. Having come from Jamaica, I was a bit of a polyglot culturalist, in that I had to speak several languages. I left my Jamaican patois behind. When I went to Mount Sinai, I learned quite a bit of Yiddish at the Jewish Hospital in New York City. Moving to Harlem, I had to speak another cultural language there, and of course making the transition to eastern North Carolina, Bertie County, required that I was familiar with a completely different culture. Although in the service of others, in the service of humans. Those are the underpinnings of our profession. And so I couldn't understand why we could not come to a recognition intellectually and in our hearts and our spirits, as compassionately as we could, that all physicians belong to one profession and therefore should be able to speak with one voice. For me, it was concerning that we were that fractured as a profession. It has to do with relationships for us to get to a peaceful conclusion. I'm being more, I need to be more optimistic than that. I think as professionals, we need to be able to leap to the fact that being one house together is better than two houses separate and apart. So at least that is the vision that I've had since being a leader of the Medical Society, and my hope continues to be that we find a pathway, not necessarily based on just resources, but on our willingness to accept each other as equal partners. The hopeful thing for me, though, is that we're a young country relative to others. I've been to other countries and been in a house that's 1,500 years old. There are rituals in other countries that are 1,000 years old or more. And so we are in a really young country that is still learning its way. So I for those of us who feel hopeless, I'm saying don't give up yet. We still have a ways to go.
I love the word hope. The word hope speaks to something that is to come. It talks about the journey is ongoing. It's not just the history that we've reflected on in these last few minutes with you, but it's about where we are going down the road and what we're doing together. That relationship building that Dr. Cunningham was talking about, that we've been intentional about for the last couple of years, partnering with the Old North State Medical Society as equals, being intentional about the demographic dynamics of our membership and our leadership. But we need you to be a part of that journey as well. We need you to come alongside and hold us accountable and be a part of the future story that we're telling of the North Carolina Medical Society. I hope you'll join us on that journey.